Hi everyone. So let's talk about the next dashboard in SQLMonitor infra. Inside the SQL Server folder, today we are going to talk about this monitoring live dashboard. In last video, we talked about this particular dashboard through which we can monitor all the SQL servers from one screen. Now let's go to our dashboard. So like other dashboards, even on this particular dashboard, we have lot of rows and each row may have multiple panels in it. In this dashboard, let's talk about the first row, which generally indicate all the metrics regarding the operating system. As you can read the header of the row, live metrics OS information. Then you can see the fully qualified domain name of the server and its IP address. Here you see multiple panels. For example, what is the memory model, how much RAM is there on the box itself, what is the available memory on the box right now, how many operating system processes are running which are consuming some significant amount of memory or CPU, how many CPU cores are there which are allocated to the box itself or server itself, and out of those CPU, how many of them are getting utilized by SQL Server. You might see a difference between these two if there is something wrong with the licensing. Then you see the version of operating system, what kind of processor you are using, how much is the CPU utilization on operating system, what is the PLE on SQL Server level, and if this particular host is part of any cluster. If this particular SQL Server instance is a SQL clustered instance, then you will see information about the various nodes which belong to the same cluster. The second row has basic metrics regarding the SQL Server or SQL instance. For example, if there are any blocking, if there is any blocking which has been there for 60 seconds, then you will see this number going beyond 0. Say that there are 10 blockings, and then in this panel you will see what is the longest blocking out of those 10 blocked sessions. Then you have this panel which indicates how much memory is being consumed by SQL Server process itself. Here is this panel which indicates whether there are any sessions or user requests which are waiting for memory grants to be allocated so that they can even start their execution. Similarly, we have other panels indicating connection counts, how many active requests are there. Then you have SQL Server CPU utilization by SQL Server process itself, whether it is availability group instance or it is a SQL clustered instance, what is the version of SQL Server, and addition and uptime information regarding the SQL Server. Then you have the third row which indicates, which will give you the trend for CPU utilization. Since we have selected for last 30 minutes, so you can see the trend of CPU utilization for last 30 minutes. The next row will indicate blocking on the server. So if there is any ongoing blocking on the server, you will see a nice blocking tree on the box. So let's create a blocking so that we can see this result, how it looks like. I already have a blocking test query ready, so I'm going to start this query. Now, in order to generate blocking, I have to run this piece of code in another session. So we have created a scenario of blocking now. Let's create another set of blocking so that we can see more number of rows in the blocking tree. Oh, we have created this blocking on wrong server. So let me get rid of this thing. We are going to create this blocking on my SQL practice instance. Just to see whether the blocking is active, we can simply run SQ who is active. There we can see one of my session is blocked by another session, and I can see a value of the blocker session ID in blocking session ID column. So we do have the blocking. Let's create another set of blocking on these same servers. I already have the database and everything ready, so I'm going to run this query in session number 1, and in another session I'm going to run this query. So now we have 2 sessions which are blocked by 2 different blockers on SQL practice SQL instance. So I simply need to change the server to this SQL practice and let all the dashboards load. And here we are. So now we can see at least we have one blocking recorded in SP who is active. So what it is saying is there is a head blocker session ID 58 which is blocking another session ID 59, and you can see the queries which are involved in the blocking. Apart from this, you will see all other details regarding the sessions which are involved in blocking, like login name, program name, host name, how many tabs they have open, what kind of command they are, and if it is blocking at some kind of resource, you can even see that value here. If you want more detailed information, for example, if you want to see even the execution plans involved, you can simply click on this drop down, and then you can inspect the query that is generating this result, and you can copy this query and run this query on your SQL instance server to get the same result. So this is what the blocking information looks like. So this was the blocking tree information. Now let's look at the lead blockers. So we want to analyze, for example, you have a server where blocking is a very common activity on your server. Then looking at individual queries may not be the right direction to resolve the blocking. In that case, you want to look at this particular row where we have 2 panels that will give you graphical representation of what are the top logins which are involved in blocking, or rather what are the top logins which are blocking others. Similarly, in the second panel, you will see what are the top login plus programs which are creating most blockings on the server. Right now, we don't have much. We just created a blocking scenario, and that blocking scenario has this particular login as lead blocker. So here we see this login is blocking 2 other sessions. Then we have this panel which helps us to analyze the memory grant pending trend on the server. So what I am going to do is I am going to generate a workload so that we can see non-zero values, and we can see something appearing on this particular panel. As usual, I am going to open SQL query stress and generate a workload against our server. So there we are going to run, we are going to open 100 sessions, 100 sessions against our SQL practice server. that would cause lot of CPU and memory issues. So, and that would help us visualize the things on the Grafana dashboard. Whether I should reduce this value. So I am going to say I want only 5 sessions in parallel. So there we are. Now we can see that we have 2 blockings. The longest blocking is for 5.25 minutes. And since we started generating the workload, so we will even see the high CPU at operating system, high CPU at SQL Server level, and eventually, if things go well, then we will even see high memory grant spending on the server. Like you can see, there was a peak when we had high memory grant spend. No, this is for memory grants outstanding, not pending. Yeah. So probably I need to increase the workload a little bit more. Let's wait for some time. Right now there are no memory grants pending. Probably I need to raise the bar here to maybe 50 parallel sessions. There we go. Since I have increased the concurrent sessions to 50, now all of a sudden there are many queries which are consuming high memory on the server, and due to that other queries have started suffering. They are not able to get even the minimum required memory to even start. So that's why we see this memory grant spending value high rising here. Then we have this particular row which indicates how many SQL Server connections are there against the SQL Server instance, and if we have reached the upper limit allowed by the operating system, then we will see we will start looking at WinSock rejections also. Right now the WinSock rejections on the box is 0, which is not a fixed value. Then in that case we will start seeing WinSock rejections. Then there is this particular row which will show all the sessions which are running over a threshold interval whose execution time has crossed or threshold interval. What is that threshold interval? You can scroll to the up, and here you will see duration. So if a session crosses 15 minutes of execution time, then you will see that session in the long running query. For now, let's reduce this threshold to 2 minutes. And let's wait for this result to load. So here we are. We can see these many sessions are there which have crossed 2 minutes of long running queries threshold. So we can see all the basic details about these queries, and if you are interested like we saw earlier, then you can even look at the queries which are generating this result, and you can simply query the server directly using these queries. Post that, we have another row which indicates what the page life expectancy looks like on the server. So before me starting the workload on the server, the PLE was around 1.06 hours. But as soon as I started the workload and that workload had queries which were asking for high memory grants, the PLE on the server went to literally few seconds. So if the PLE on your server is going all of a sudden to very minimal value from a good value, in that case you have to look for the queries consuming high, which are asking for high memory grants, like in our case. So next one is a general matrix which tells you the speed of your server, how the general workload looks like on your server. So this is how the batch request per second on the server looks like. Generally, the batch request per second is 5 to 10. Now, this particular row, SQL connections distribution, it always shows the live connection distribution on the server. This information is not getting stored as of now. This might change in future versions of the SQLMonitor infra, but right now this row shows all the connections with various grouping. For example, this first row shows how many connections are there, grouped by host name, login name, status, client host address, and client interface. This particular panel is showing how many connections are there, grouped by their client interface. Similarly, this one is showing how many connections are coming from what particular host. For example, we are running our workload on this SQL practice machine from our workstation machine. So that's why the client host workstation is having around 52 connections. Similarly, this panel shows us all the connections by login, and this one finally is showing all the connections by their state. Then one of the most important panels in this particular dashboard are these panels. So this particular panel shows how the CPU utilization looks like at the operating system process level. So for now, let me stop the workload. And there we are. This is how the CPU utilization looks like on SQL practice SQL Server at the operating system processes level. So at the operating system level, we can see we have measurements every 1 minute. This is at 21:58. This snapshot of CPU was at 22. So approximately 2 minutes. Okay. So within 2 minutes, the last values are like this. SQL Server has consumed around 18, not 2 minutes now. So from 22:02 till 22:08, around 6 minutes. Within 6 minutes, SQL Server has consumed 18.6 minutes of CPU time. Then there was this process which consumed 5 seconds within that 6 minutes of time. System process has consumed around 2 seconds, and rest of this is how the CPU utilization looks like by other processors. So how do we read this? From this dashboard, we have to look for the process which is having the highest vertical bar, as well as we have to consider the difference of time between these two snapshots. So in this case, the first snapshot, second last snapshot is of 22, that is 10 p.m. 2 minutes, and this one is 10 p.m. 8 minutes. That means we have a gap of 6 minutes between these two snapshots. So all the metrics here in the last column, they represent whatever CPU utilization has happened for that 6 minutes of interval. The same information is being represented by next panel, only the visualization chart has changed here. The next row is showing the similar information but for the memory utilization. So this one is easy to read. You can see here SQL Server is consuming the highest amount of memory on the on SQL Practice instance, around 26.2 GB, and this is how the memory utilization looks like by other operating system processes. Then we have this particular row which shows if there is any SQL agent job or there is any DBA maintenance like checkDB, backup, or index rebuilds or reorg, then they will appear in this particular row. Then we have this row which gives you the disk space utilization on the box. Good part about this particular panel is we even get to see the space utilization at the mounted volumes level. So for example, this E backup 01 is a mounted volume inside E drive. You get to see the space utilization even at the mounted volume level, which you don't see usually if you collect this information from XP fixed drive stored proc from within SQL Server. So this information is again getting collected through PowerShell. And finally, we have last row which has panel for weight stats, how the weight stats look like on the server. So you can see generally the weight stats on the server is very low, nothing running on in terms of workload. There is nothing going on the server in general. But since we started the workload, so the latest capturing, the second last capturing for weight stats happened at 22, that is 10 p.m. and then we have a weight stats capturing around 10:10. So within 10 minutes of duration, this is how the weight stats look like and we can see the top weight was CX packet, and just following that SOS scheduler yield was the second weight type. So in short, when we ran the workload, that workload specifically caused high CPU on the server. So if I have to troubleshoot anything on the server, I want to start troubleshooting based on SOS scheduler yield weight. That means I want to look for the queries which are consuming high CPU. So that's it, folks, regarding this dashboard. I hope you like it. Do like and subscribe my channel and deploy this SQL Monitor infra. Thank you.